Hello, everyone. The study of the Torah this week in Yeshivas Elimelech is in loving memory of Miriam Bat Yosef, the mother of Charlotte, who died on the 24th of Tammuz. And I realized that we are already in the ninth halacha of chapter 22, and we never actually discussed what Tzurat HaPetach is. Tzurat HaPetach literally means the shape of a doorway. So this is how the classic doorway to a chatzer, a courtyard, used to be. It was iron gates and a very nice, well, if you can afford it, a very nice stone two big columns to protect it, and it would be locked at night. Uh, Nehemiah in the book of Nehemiah talks about how he convinced the merchants in Jerusalem to lock the gates not only every night as they were used to, but also on Friday afternoon, long before sunset, in order for merchandise not to be brought in or out of Jerusalem during Shabbat by non-Jews. Even though non-Jews are allowed to, technically, he wanted the street of Jerusalem to look like it does in many places. So most people cannot afford such a gate, and most courtyards today aren't that small or petite, I should say. So this is a diagram from Kol Lashon. This is Reshut Rabim, the public domain, the freeway or the big street. Then there's a mavoy, which is like almost like a hallway, and each mavoy opens up to a chatzer. So this is a computerized diagram, but guess what? I talked about Nachalat Shiva. It's 100 and something years old. It was one of the first neighborhoods outside of the walled city in Jerusalem. So this is one look into a chatzer, but I think this one talks even more volume. So over here would be that gate. You come in, all around it is like houses, almost like a fort. This is actually the original well that they would draw water for everybody in the chatzer, everybody in the courtyard, and they would do Eruv Chatzerot. They would actually the word Eruv means to mix, and basically they would collect food from every one of the neighbors before Shabbat, and they would gather it in one person's house, and then everybody would share the meal on Shabbat. It doesn't matter what time, just as long as, and that way they would be allowed, after saying the blessing, to eat something together and make peace. I think it is even more so relevant to our days when people don't even know their neighbors. And there's an amazing story in the Yerushalmi about how there was two families in this one of these chatzerot in one of these courtyards that have had a fight, and the son basically complains to his mother that unless we get food from this neighbor, we're not going to be able to go to shul, we're not going to be able to draw water from the well, we're not going to be able to do anything because you have to have the permission of all the people in the courtyard. So I don't know if he succeeded in making peace that day, but his mother told him to go and get food from them, and so they changed the order of who was keeping it, but somehow that did bring peace, and so that's what Eruv Chatzerot really was all about. And so today we have strings like this, or next picture, or like this, and it's basically we're not allowed to have more than 10 amot between each two poles, and the string on top makes it look like a doorway, even though it's supposedly imaginary. By the way, the same halacha applies to sukkah. If you have the walls and they're empty, but they're close enough, they're less than 15 feet from each other, the poles, then that is considered a kosher sukkah because we have a rule that good achid mechitzta, which the wall goes all the way to heaven, basically. And so also there's other requirements, but not getting into that right now. So in practice, most observant Jews follow the lenient position and carry in cities relying on an eruv of the Tzurat Petach type, This leads to an interesting question, given that half of the poskim are stringent, believing that an eruv of the Torah Petach type is not sufficient in cities with streets wider than 16 amot, and that it is irrelevant how many people actually pass through. How is it that most observant Jews follow the lenient position? After all, it is a case of doubt pertaining to a Torah law where we are normally stringent. So the answer is very, very good. The simple answer is that in rare cases, when dwelling with an issue in which it is very difficult to be stringent, sometimes the custom takes hold to rely on a lenient opinion, even though there is a possible Torah violation at stake. Furthermore, it truly is difficult to follow the stringent position here, as that would mean that no one could go out on Shabbat with anything in their pockets, even tissues and the like, which are sometimes necessary. Additionally, families would not be able to visit one another because one may not push a stroller in a Rashut Rabim, and there would be no way to bring diapers, bottles, and so on. And by the way, one of the Mishnayot actually starts with Notel Adam et bno v'ha'even biyado. So, because we have a rule that each child technically is able to carry themselves, meaning that yes, it helps them go faster if we lift them up and hold them in our arms, but technically they can walk by themselves. So the Mishnah says that even if a child picked up a rock and which is muktzeh, but he likes it and he's playing with it, you're not obligated to make him drop it on the floor. You can carry it, and it's not considered like you are carrying. So, since there is no alternative, and given that half the poskim are lenient, we can rely on the lenient position in this case. We should add that the poskim are not really evenly divided in this case, meaning it's not 50-50. As we will see, some poskim ruled that there are additional requirements that must be met in order for an area to be considered a Reshut HaRabim by Torah law. If we take these requirements into account, it turns out that according to most poskim, today's streets would not qualify as a Reshut HaRabim. The main issue that, thank God, is not so common is that the street has to go straight without any turns or bends, as it was in the desert when the Israelites were walking through. And so that's why I keep mentioning Ocean Parkway, because it is straight and it splits Flatbush into half, and there's very little leniency that we can do there. But everywhere else, most streets, even the street that we live in, turns a few times, and so they're designed differently. Therefore, an eruv of the Tzurat Petach type is sufficient. First, according to some poskim, an area is considered a Reshut HaRabim by Torah law only when the streets bisect the entire city in a straight line. If it is slightly crooked, it is no longer a Reshut HaRabim. Most cities do not have a main street that is completely straight, and thus we may rely on an eruv of the Tzurat Petach type. Second, some poskim feel that since our streets are laid out such that every street is intersected by another street, all streets are considered enclosed by a wall on three sides by the other streets. Accordingly, they do not qualify as a Reshut HaRabim by Torah law, and an eruv of the Tzurat Petach type is sufficient. There are additional reasons to be lenient, as explained in the notes. When we combine all these opinions, it turns out that according to the majority of poskim, today's streets are considered a Carmelit, meaning a rabbinic public domain, and carrying in them can be permitted with an eruv of Tzurat Petach type. Nevertheless, according to many, since a Torah prohibition may be at stake, lechatchila it is proper not to rely on an eruv of the Tzurat Petach type in a place where there are streets wider than 16 amot, and with all the other conditions that we just talked about. So, like I said about Flatbush, on one side there's an eruv, on the other side there's also an eruv, but you can't cross from one area to the other holding anything or pushing a stroller. And we'll stop here and we'll open up for questions.